Join me as we learn Chitas together, Parshas Vayeira, which is chapter 18, verse 1. The fourth Torah reading in the Torah is Parshas Vayeira for day 1, Sunday. Vayeira elav Hashem be'eleinu mamre. We are now talking and continuing of last week's Torah reading where we spoke about Avram having circumcision. Now Avram is recuperating on the third day after his circumcision, which happens to be on the 15th of Nisan in the year 2047. Vayeira elav Hashem, and God appeared to Avram, be'eleinu mamre, in the plains of Mamre. Why there, we'll soon see. Rashi explains. Yoshev Pesach ha'oil, and Avram was sitting at the entrance of his tent, kechoim hayom, at the heat of the day. There's the well-known story of the Rebbe Rashab. While the Rebbe Rashab was a child of 5 or 6 years old, he came to his grandfather, the Tzemach Tzedek, and he asked his grandfather, the Tzemach Tzedek, why was it that Avram Avinu merited that God should appear to him? And the Tzemach Tzedek responded and said, as a yidat tzaddik to 99 years, that when a Jew, a tzaddik, a holy person at 99 years old, decides to circumcise himself, he is worthy that God should visit him. The Rebbe expounded on this, that the very fact that the previous Rebbe told us the story about a child means that we also can learn something from it. That we should always aspire, that we should want to see God, but even more so that even young children have the opportunity that we should teach them and educate them about the greatness of Hashem. And never to think that a child is too young to learn about spirituality and godliness. Rashi, Vayeira elav, why did God appear to him? Over here, Rashi comes to tell us, it doesn't say that God spoke to him, but first it says that he came to see him, Vayeira elav, and he appeared to him. Why did he appear to him? Levaker es achayla, to visit the sick. Omer Rab Chama bar Chanina. Rabbi Chama bar Chanina said, being that this was the third day of after his circumcision, which then the pain is at its worst. So a God came to see how he is feeling. How do we know that the third day is the most painful? Later on in the story of Shechem, when they kidnapped Dinah and Shimon and Levi wiped out the city of Shechem, they did it on the third day because that was the most painful day of the circumcision after they had their circumcision. Be'eleinu mamre, why does the Torah tell us Be'eleinu mamre? It was in the plains of Mamre. Who nasan le'etza lamila, because it was Mamre who gave advice to Avraham that he should do the circumcision out in the public and not be afraid of it. Leficha, therefore God as a reward, Niklal of Bechelke, came and appeared himself to Avram in the area of Mamre. Yoshev, if we look at the word Yoshev, generally for a chaylam you would have Yoshev, you would have a vav there. However, it says Yoshev without a vav. One can read it, Yoshav was sitting. Bikesh Shlamit, he was sitting and he wanted to get up in honor of the divine presence of the Shekhinah that came to Avraham. Amar la HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said to him, Shave, you sit, Vani Emid, and I will stand. Va'ata, and you will be a sign, Simon Levanecha, this will be a sign for your children, She'osani Lisyati Va'atasa Deyanim, that I will stand amongst the judges, Ve'hein Yoshvin, and they will be sitting. Shenemer, as it says, Elikim Nitzav Va'adas Kel, that whenever the judges are judging a person in a rabbinic tribunal, God is amongst them, and God stands together with them. Pesach Ha'oil, why does it say at the entrance of the tent? This is teaching us that even though Avram was ill at the time, because he was suffering from the circumcision, he was sitting at the entrance of his tent, Lires, to see him, Yesh Ever V'Shav, if there's any passerbyers coming, Yachniseu B'Veisei, and he'll be able to welcome them in his home. As we're going to see that that's why God, in fact, sent the angels. At the heat of the day, God took out the sun from its lens, from its layer that protects it, that it shouldn't hurt people, that the sun has a cover on it, so that it should be really hot and guests should not bother him and he should be able to recuperate. But since Hashem saw that Avram is tired, that Avram is going to be in pain, because guests weren't coming to visit him, Hevi brought Hamalachim Alav Kidmusanoshim, so he sent the angels that they should look in the form of humans. This way, Avram should have some guests that he should invite in his home. As we see, We're going to see in verse 2. Vayisa Eina. And Avram lifted his eyes. He looked up, and behold, Vayar, and he sees, V'hinei shleisha anoshim, there were 3 men standing before him, Nitzavim alav standing before him. Vayoretz, and he saw them, Vayoretz likrosam, and he ran towards them, Pesach ha'oil, from the opening, from the entrance of his tent. V'yishtachu arza, and he prostrated himself to the ground. V'hinei shleisha anoshim, so Rashi tells us, why were there sent 3? Why couldn't one do the job? So Echad levaser Sarah. One was there to tell Sarah that she was going to have a child. So Echad lafich Sodom. And one came to overturn Sodom and destroy Sodom, as we're going to see in the next part of the Torah reading. The Echad lerapis as Avram, the other came to heal Avram. She'ein malach, why did he need 3? Why couldn't one just do all the jobs? So Rashi explains to us and tells us, She'ein malach echad oiser shtei shluchias, because one malach, one angel cannot do 2 errands. They can't multitask. Maybe they're like men. They can't multitask. They have to do one job at a time. Teidalacha, you should know that every errand that is done through each individual malach, shekein kol aparsha humaskiran, and throughout the Torah reading, where he mentions the angels together, beloshin rabim, in multitude, vayochelu, and they ate, vayomru elav, and they said, the vibavsoira. But when it comes to the actual case of where they go to do their particular jobs, for example, when they tell and notify Avraham about the birth of Yitzchak, Nemar Vayomer, use singular term, Shevush Avalecha, we will return. And so too, when they are overturning the city of Sodom, it says, Kiloyu Chalasis Davar, I'm not able to do anything. Again, singular term, Levilti Hafchi, without not able to return, not able to overturn it until telling Lot until he leaves the place of Sodom. Urifal, the angel, Sheripes Avram, that healed Avram, Holach Misham, he went from there to Stone, Lahatzil Loit, to save Lot. So if you look at the Rifal, only after he finished doing the job of healing Avram, did he go do a similar job, which was to save Lot from Sodom. That's why later on, when it comes to the verses in Sodom, it says, Hushanemar, when it was when he took them outside, and he said, save your life. What you have from here is, there was one person saving, there was one person overturning, one angel, I should say, that was turning you over Sodom, one angel that was saving Lot, and another angel that was telling Sarah about the birth of Yitzchak. So you see that when it talks about the angels, we'll use a plural because they were all doing things, eating, speaking, whatever it may be. However, when it came to their particular jobs, it's singular term because one angel can only do one errand. Nitzavim alav. Nitzavim, what does it mean? That we're standing on him? Meaning lefanav, before him. Kimoi, we find this in many places, as we mentioned earlier in Rashi's. Va'olav mati Menashe, and upon him was the tribe of Menashe. Aval, the reason why over here it uses the terminology olav, loshin nikiyahu klapi malachim. It uses a respectful term, a clean term for the angels, that they're considered standing above the human being as they are on a higher level. Vayar, and he saw. Why does it say twice and he saw? Mahu, Vayar shtepamim. Why does it say Vayar and he saw twice? Harishain, the first one, Kimashmoy, as its simple interpretation, that he saw them from a distance. Ba'asheni, the second one, Loshin Havana, the terminology of understanding. When you see something and you look into it a little deeply, Nistakel, he saw, that they were standing in one place, meaning that he now understood who these people were. They were intended to be guests for him. And he understood that they didn't want to bother him that much. Even though that the angels knew that the Avram would go out to greet them, they stood in their place in his honor. They wanted to show him that they didn't want to bother him. But however, he anticipated them and he ran towards them. And that's why Rashi, in the old Rashi, adds this whole last section that we mentioned. The Rashi continues. The Baba Metzia, and the tractate of Baba Metzia, the sages, the Talmudic rabbis, analyze this verse and say, Ksiv, it says, Nitzavim alav, they were standing on him. Uksiv, Vayeira Tzlikrasam, meaning that they were standing close to him, and then it says he ran towards them. What is this telling us? Meaning that there was a certain distance that he had to go and run towards them. So the Talmud explains and says, Kad chaziu davashari v'osar, when they saw that he was busy with his bandages, opening his bandages and closing his bandages, pershu himanu, they started taking a distance. That means they started coming close to be his guest. But then they saw that he was busy with his bandages, dealing with his wounds. So they took a distance. When he saw that, miyad Vayeira Tzlikrasam, immediately he got up to chase them and bring them back. Verse 3. Vayomer, and he said, Adonai imno matzasichem beinecha, my masters, if it will please you, if you have found favor in my eyes, al no saver me'al avdecha, please do not pass me, your servant, by. Rashi, the third Rashi in the third verse. Vayomer Adonai imno, he turned to them like in plural. Lagodil shebehem, even though there was many of them, but he turned to the one that was the greatest of them. Amar, he said, Ukro kulam adonim, he called all of them masters. V'lagodil, however, he said to the main one, the greatest of them, Amar al no saver, please do not pass by me. Meaning, do not continue on your way without stopping. And being that the big one, the oldest, the greatest amongst them, will not continue to travel, Yamdu Chaveira Vimai, so then his friends will stay with them and they will not travel as well. According to this terminology, we can understand when it uses the terminology of the word Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud, sometimes it's God's name. Huchoil, however, in this case, it's not means a master and it doesn't mean God's name. And therefore, because it's not referring to God, one is able to say the word. Dover acher, another explanation, koideshu, that actually it means, and he is referring to God. The Haya Imer LaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he actually was not referring to the angels, he was talking to God. What was he saying? Please don't pass, meaning that God came to visit him, and over here he's having guests. So he's telling Hashem, please wait as he goes and welcomes his guest. Even though it only says it afterwards and he went out to get them, still in all, he spoke to them beforehand. This is the usual terminology of the verses, to say things not necessarily in the order of events that had happened, but in the order of the way it's said. Like we already had this before in chapter 6, that says that God should not judge a person after Noach was born. We can't say that the decree of the Babel happened after children of Noach. This decree was already before Noach's children were born 20 years. Both of these terminologies, whether we're calling the master God or the master is the angels, both of them are of these explanations are brought in Bereshis Rabbah. Verse 4. Now that the angels comply and they are willing to stay in Avram's place, so therefore Avram now offers them some water. Yukachna mi'at mayim. Please let a little bit of water be brought. V'rachatzu ragleichem, and wash your feet. V'yishanu tachas ha'etz, and recline under the tree. Yukachna, what does he refer? Let water be brought. Al yedei shliach, through somebody else. V'hakadosh baruch hu shilam labanav, and because Avram was kind to the angels, therefore later on, same as well to Avram's children when they were traveling in the desert, God was kind to them as well and sent them water al yedei shliach through a messenger, which was Moshe to take out the water from the rock. Shnemer, as it says, and Moshe lifted his hand and hit the rock that water should come out. And wash your feet. Why did they have to wash their feet? Because since they look like Arev, Shem Arevim, that they were Arabs, and the people at the time would serve the dust on their feet Avram was a person who believed in monotheism and any of these pagan religions that served any other type of idols, and he was careful not to bring any idolatry into his home, and therefore he wanted that they should wash their feet, not to bring in the dust that they served into their feet. In contrast, in contrast to Lot, Shaloi Hikbid, that he did not care if any idolatry would be brought into his home. Hikdim, therefore, by Lot, he first says, Lina, stay over at our home, then Rechitza, and then wash your feet. Shenemer, as it says later on in chapter 19, verse 2, Velinu v'rachatzi raglechem, rest over and wash your feet. As Lot was careless about idolatry. Tachas eitz, what does this mean? Tachas eitz, it doesn't mean under a beam in his home, because the word eitz literally means wood. So Rashi explains, means tachas ilon, he had a tree for shade, and he offered them some relaxation and to recline and to hang out under in the shade. Verse number 5. The ekchafas lechem, and I will bring you a piece of bread, the sadu lipchem, so that you can gather your strength. The achar taveru, and only afterwards will you continue on your way. Because after all you have paid a visit to your servant. Vayeimru, and they said, Kain tasa akasher divarta. Yes, we will do as you said. What does it mean, v'sadu lipchem? Where, if you look at the different things that we're going to see, that Avram brings them and offers them, the only time that it uses the terminology of a meal is when it talks about the bread. As we see, we find this idea is mentioned in many verses in the Torah, verses in the prophets, and verses in scriptures. Vayeira, Matzinu, the pita sada deliba. That bread is what satiates the heart. Vayeira, we see this in the Torah, right over here where we just read. I will take bread, and you will be satisfied. In prophets, in the book of Judges, where it says, and that your heart will be satisfied with a piece of bread. Baksuvim, and in scriptures, where it says in Tehillim, Psalm 104, V'lechem levav eneshisad, and bread is what satisfies, satiates the heart of man. The sadu lipchem, what does it mean? Lipchem, your heart. It should say levavchem. Omer Rab Chama says levavchem, your heart. The meaning, both hearts, the Yetzirah, the evil inclination, and the godly inclination. Inksiv, that it doesn't say here. And lipchem, your heart. Magid, shein Yetzirah shelet malachim. This is teaching us, meaning one heart, the one inclination, that the evil inclination does not have any jurisdiction and cannot rule on angels. Achar taveru, what does it mean? After you will pass? Meaning, achar kain, after you finish eating, and you have a satiated meal, then telechu, then you'll continue on your way. Ki al kain avartem, the meaning of the verse Rashi explains is, ki hadavar azeh, because of this thing, after you finish eating, ani mivakish mikem, I ask of you, me'achar shem vartem alai, because you came by to visit me, l'chvaidi, I ask you that in my honor, eat something, and then you'll continue on your way. Ki al kain, Rashi explains that the word ki al kain comes from the word al asher, like because of. The chain, so too, any time you have in the verse where it says kol al ki al kain shabamikra, for example, later on in chapter 19, when Lot talks about his angels, he also uses the same terminology. Ki al kain bo b'tzel karasi, because they therefore came to visit me. Ki al kain ra'isi ponecha. So too, when Yaakov speaks to Esav, and when I saw your face, Ki al kain le'nisatia, Yehuda says about Tamar, and therefore I did not give her. And so too later on in the book of Bamidbar, Ki al kain yadaita chanisenu, and because you know how we are throughout the desert. Now that the angels agreed to stay, and Avram offers them food, Avram needs to go to the kitchen and get the food ready. Vayemayir Avram Vayeira, and Avram hastens to the tent, and who's in the tent is Sarah. Vayemer, and he says, Mahari, hurry, shloish si'im kemach, 3 sa, which is about 53 pounds, 24 kilos, of flour one should make and sift. What kind of flour? Kemach, which is coarse flour. Then also use lushi, and you should put it into, and it should become soiless, kemach selis, a coarse flour, then should also have fine flour. Lushi, you will knead it. Vasi uges, and make loaves of bread. Literally, the word uges means cookies, as we'll see. According to some, it was actually Pesach, and this was referring to matzahs. As we see Rashi, what was he serving them? Kemach selas. Which one was it? Was it the coarse flour or the fine flour? Kemach means a coarse flour. Selas means a fine flour. So he explains, selas, fine flour, which is good, leuges, for making these cookies. Hakemach. However, the coarse flour, lamilon shentabachim, that's for the dough that they make. They would make a dough that would cover their pots. Lechasis, that's like lishef as a zuama. In those days, the lid of the pot was made out of a dough which would collect the sweat, the moisture from the pot, and that's what they would put on the top of the pot. So the kemach, the coarse flour, was for the dough, for the cover of the pot. The fine flour was for the baked goods that they were going to make. And the El HaBakar, now that he has Sarah making the bread, now Avram himself, Bakar Rotz Avram, Avram ran to the cattle. Vayikach ben Bakar, and he took from the cattle a one tender and choice calf, Rach v'tois, who was nice and soft, good and choice. Vayitin es anar, and he gave this cattle to the lad, who at the time was Yishmael. Vayimar lasi soisai, and he hurried to prepare it. So let's understand what he had here and why the different terminologies and what was actually going on here. So Rashi explains and tells us, Ben Bakar Rach v'tois. Over here, there are three different terminologies that he calls the animal that he took. A ben bakar, which is a tender and choice calf, and then he uses the terminology as well, rach v'toiv, that it's soft and tender. So the ben bakar was a calf that was soft and tender. So there were three terminologies here. What do I learn from that? Gimel parim, there were three cows, to give them three tongues. So he needed to slaughter three different calves so they can all each have a tongue together with the mustard. That was the reason why he gave this to them. This was considered a king's meal, to give somebody an entire portion and not just cut up the portion in parts. El Hanar, the child. Zeh Yishmael, this is Yishmael. Chanche b'mitzvahs, the reason why he gave him jobs, to educate him. So we see from here, how do we educate our children is by role modeling, not only telling them, but showing them and being with them and giving them the opportunities to do mitzvahs. Verse number 8. Vayikach chema v'cholov, and he took the butter and the milk. He brought some cream and milk. Ben HaBakar, and the calf. Asher asa, that he made, that he prepared for them. Vayitin lifneim, and he placed it before them. V'hu made aleim, and he stood over them. Tachas ha'etz, under the tree, vayechelu, and watched as they ate. So over here we have a few things in this verse. Vayikach chema, he brought them the actual cream, v'halechem, but the bread that we mentioned before, that he went into the tent to tell Sarah to make the bread, lo hevi. What happened to the bread? We only see about the cream and the meat. Lafi shapirsa Sarah nida. Because all of a sudden at that time she started having a menstrual period. She started being back like the young women who then have their menstrual period, and she became impure. So because of that, then she touched the dough, and the dough now became impure. And they had no clean bread, no pure bread, and therefore there was nothing for him to give them. Chema, what is cream? Shuman hachalab. You have milk, and then on the milk there's a certain cream, fats of the milk that's on top, and the kiltin me'alpanav, you take it off, and that's what you use for a cream. Ben HaBakar Asher asa. What does it mean, the cattle calf that he made? Asher tikin, that he prepared. He didn't literally make the calf that God makes, but he did all the preparations for it that they should be able to eat it. As we know, and even though there were three of them, so over here we see kamba shtikan shetikan amtiva isikamayo, that he would bring it, each one as it got ready, he would bring it before them and give it to them. Vayochelu, and they ate. I thought angels don't have to eat. We know up above there's no eating. Niru kameisha achlu. They made as if they were eating. Mikan. From here we learn, a person should not change from the actual customs. Some ask, how is he able to give them meat and milk together? Even though it was before the Torah was given, no, they are forefathers kept the Torah. So if you look in the order, first of all, he gave them milk first, and then he gave them the meat. First the cream, and then the meat. Number two, they were angels. They actually maybe didn't even eat it. The fact that he gave them separately could have been that they ate first the milk and then the meat, so not necessarily were they eating it at the same time. Vayemru elav, and they said to him, verse number 7. No, verse number 9, I'm sorry. Vayemru elav, and they said to him, Aye, sorry ishtacha, we're sorry your wife. Vayeira, and he said, Hine ba'oyel, he replied, here in the tent. Vayeira elav, Rashi says, Nakud, if you look in a Chumash, or even in the Torah, the word elav, there are dots on top of the elav. Generally, whenever there are dots on top of a word, means that there's something more that the verse wants to tell us. Shabei elav, well, there's little dots on the words of elav. Aleph, Yud, and Vav all have dots on them. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, Kol mokim chaksav Rabba lakuda. Any time you have a word that there's no dots on the entire word, Atadeder shaksav, you only read the parts that have the words together. So, for example, in this case, you have Aleph, Yud, and Vav have dots. That means there are more letters that have dots than letters that don't. Then read those letters with the dots on their own. Vikan. So therefore, in our case, on the Kuda Rabba Laksav, there are more letters that have dots on them than letters that don't. At the Deir Shanakuda. So therefore, you have to read what those dots are telling us. And what is those dots telling us? Aleph, Yud, Vav means Ayoy. We're. She. Af l'sara shalu Ayoy Avram. Meaning that they didn't only ask Avram where Sarah was, they also asked Sarah where was Avram. Lamandu. It teaches us how to have respect. A person should ask how his hosts are doing. La'ish ala isha, you ask the woman about her husband. La'ish ala isha, to the man about his wife. Laisha ala ish, and to the woman about her husband. Just like these angels did, they asked, and that's why the word ayoy, asking Sarah about Avram and asking Avram about Sarah. The Baba Metzia Imrim, in Baba Metzia it says, the angels actually knew, they knew where our matriarch Sarah was. Ella, what is this telling us? Leidia, to show the greatness of Sarah, that she was modest. They wanted to make her more beloved to her husband, to show, look how modest. And therefore they said, where's your wife? Showing how great she is. Rabbi Yosef B'Chanina said, the reason why they asked, where is Sarah? To send her love, Keishal Bracha. They were making him the blessing of wine after the grace after meals, and they wanted to send her some of the wine that she should taste from it. Hine Ba'il, she is in the tent. Why is she in the tent? Snuhi. She is modest, stays out of the public eye, and because of that, she is hanging out of the tent, not with us, by the tree. Verse number 10. Vayomer, and the second angel said, Shoiv Oshruve Lecha, I will surely return to you at this time, exact time, Ke'ez Chai, at this exact time, and behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son. The Sarah Shemas Pesachayil, Sarah hears this behind the door, and by the entrance of the tent, V'hu Achrav, and she is behind him, behind the tent. Rashi, Ka'es Chaya, Ba'es Ka'es Hazes L'Shana Ba, exactly at this time in the coming year, Pesach Chaya, as we mentioned at the beginning of this Torah reading, it was Pesach, the 15th of Nisan, on the Pesach Haba, and that's why they were making the crackers. On the Pesach Haba, Milad Yitzchak, and in the coming Pesach, Yitzchak was born. Midaloi Karinan, Ka'es, because it does not say Ke'es, Ella Ka'es, with the word of Kamatz, meaning at exactly this time I will be back. Ka'es Chaya, what does the word Chaya mean? Alive. Shetehei Chaya Lachem, that this is going to be alive, meaning it's going to be for sure. I guarantee it. You're both going to be alive, healthy, and well when this is going to happen. Shreiv Ashuv. What does it mean I will return? He didn't say that I will return to you. The malach will, that the angel will return. He said this as a messenger of God, meaning that God will return to you at this time. And we find this even by Hagar, where we see by Yemerla Malach, the angel tells her, Harba, I will increase. But who aim the angel doesn't have the ability to increase their children. Because he's talking as a messenger of God, so too, Afghan over here as well. He said this in the name of God. We see this as well. Elisha tells the woman of the Shunamis, at this exact time, at this exact time we'll be hugging a child. And she says, Ladoni to her master, Isha Likim, a man of God, don't lie to your maidservant. These angels that told Sarah about her birth of Yitzchak, Amru, they said, Lamoyed Ashuv, we will return at this appointed time, meaning that they wanted that their words should be believed. So too, meaning that the woman, the Shunamis, was telling Elisha, when those angels promised her that she would have a child, they promised that they would return. So therefore their words were believable. Amr, but you didn't say that you're going to return and you're going to make sure that I'm going to have this child. Amr Elisha. So Elisha responded to that woman that angels are not like humans. Those angels that they're for eternity. That's why they said we'll return. I that am from flesh and blood, today I'm alive, tomorrow I can die. Therefore I cannot guarantee you. Therefore she says, whether I'm alive or dead, exactly this time, you will have a child. Over here, what we see, this is Rashi is comparing the two stories of where the woman of the Shunamis was promised by Elisha that she would have a child. And she tells Elisha, don't lie to me. Why wouldn't she believe Elisha? Because she tells Elisha, look, when Sarah was promised that she would have a child, they said, we'll be there for it to happen. Which Elisha responded, they're angels. They can promise they would be there. I can't. But who acharav? What does it mean he's behind it? HaPesach, the entrance. Hoya acher hamalach. The entrance was behind where the angel was standing, and she was standing behind that entrance. Verse 11. V'Avram v'Sara skinim bayomim, boim bayomim. And Avram and Sarah were already very old. Chod aliyis l'Sara eirach kanashim. At that point, they deeply internalized their experiences because as they were in an older age. However, Sarah has ceased having her woman's cycle. Chod aliyis, the word chod aliyis means pasak mimena. She stopped having it. Eirach kanashim, eirach nidus, which means her woman's cycle. Verse 12. Vatitzchak Sarah b'kir b'leimer, and Sarah laughed at herself, saying, Achrei v'loisi, now that I am withered, hoysa liedna, will my skin become smooth again? V'adaini zaken, besides, my husband is old. Rashi, verse 13, verse 12, Rashi, b'kirba, meaning at herself. Mistakelis b'mei avamr, she looked at her body and said, like in question, is it possible that this human being, that this body is able to carry a child? That these breasts would be able to give milk and nurse? Edna, the word Edna means tzitzuach basar, smoothness of skin. Ubaloshna Mishnah, this is from the same language that the Mishnah uses, Mashidas Aseir Ma'adinas Abasar. Then when it comes to on Shabbos, we're talking about laws about removing the hair and smoothening the skin. Davracher, another word that it means, Idan can mean. Id Loshein Idan means like a time. Zman Vesas Nidis, meaning after that she's already stopped, she's having a menstrual period. So therefore, she's saying, I'm already post-menopause, and therefore I'm not able to have children. Verse 13. Ha'af umnam. Vayomer Hashem al Avram. And God said to Avram, Lama zetzachik Sarah. Why did Sarah laugh? Lamer saying, Haf umnam elid. Will I really give birth? Vani zakanti, and I am old. Rashi. Ha'af umnam hagamemes says that even though it's true, elid, that she will, because she give birth, Vani zakanti, is it even possible? Is it even true that I can give birth? Vani zakanti, and I am old. If you noticed, Sarah didn't say I am old. Sarah said, Avram's old. But what does the Torah do? It changes it. Why? Between husband and wife. Because she said, she said, my husband is old. And because God didn't want to offend Avram, he changed what she said. That should be no offense. From here we learn that we're allowed to sometimes change some words because of peace. Hayipole me Hashem, verse 14. Hayipole me Hashem davar. Is anything what too wondrous for God? Lam moyed, at this exact time, Oshuv elecha, I will return to you. Ke'eis chaya u'l'sara vein. And Sarah will have, I will turn to you, and Sarah will have, surely Sarah will have a son. Rashi, hayipole. What does the word hayipole mean? As the Targum translates, hayiskasa. Is it even wondrous to you? Is there anything in this world which is too wondrous, too separate, too difficult, or too hidden for me to do? Like my wish, I am God. I have the infinite powers. Lamoyed, the word lamoyed, meaning to that exact time that I already set. That I told you yesterday, that the angel said, this exact time, but in another year. This concludes the first Torah reading for Sunday, Parshas Vayeira.